girl from Nashville, and I'm just so proud to be here. Thank you, Jenny, and for inviting me. I'm honored to be with you today. I have learned a lot already from talking to you and from listening to Uri, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot more this afternoon. I want to talk to you about experiences that we've had at Austin Peay, and this has a little bit of a personal context to it. You'll see it through my eyes, biased as it may be, but it's sort of our story. I want to start by telling you about our first redesign, which had nothing directly whatsoever to do with developmental education. It preceded all of our redesign efforts for our remedial and developmental education. Our first redesign concerned our math course that we had at Austin Peay that was designed for students who were majoring in the arts and humanities. We had a course like that on the books for years and years and years and years and years. And I was interested in this course. I volunteered to teach this course because I love mathematics. I mean, I really love mathematics. I think it's powerful and surprising and stunningly beautiful, and I was eager to help students who were history majors and English majors and art majors and music majors see the wonder and the beauty of this subject, because I knew in what they were studying they could appreciate wonder and beauty. They looked at it all the time, and so I wanted to have an experience like that. And what I found when I started teaching that was a course that was poorly enrolled. Most of the advisors of that target audience would put the students in college algebra instead. They failed it in droves. They would put students with a 35 ACT in college algebra because they had to have a credit-bearing math course, and the students didn't want to take a challenging math course, and the students who came through developmental failed it in droves. That our FDW rate for college algebra at the time was about 58%, but our FDW rate for this liberal arts math course was about 58% too. So I could sort of see why the advisors didn't much care which course they failed. So we were teaching a hodgepodge. We had a textbook, which to those of us who were mathematicians seemed fairly interesting, but it had a whole bunch of chapters in it, and we covered a whole bunch of chapters, and we did a little bit of this, and we did a little bit of that, and we did a little bit of something else. And occasionally, after doing some mathematics completely out of any context of anything that they thought was useful, we'd say, oh, by the way, here's an application, and then we'd move, before we got very deeply into that, we'd move on to something else, okay? You may think that that's a caricature of the student in the class. That's actually a caricature of the teachers. I love math, and I was bored. And so what I did, or what we did, is I got together with two other faculty members who were willing to think about this in a different way, and we turned this course upside down. Instead of lecturing, we replaced a large percentage of the lecture time with active learning strategies that the students did in cooperative learning groups, and we would form these groups early in the semester, and they would stay in those groups the rest of the year. We kind of created a learning community in the classroom, and we completely changed our approach to content. Instead of studying a little bit of this kind of math, and oh, here's an application, and here a little bit of that kind of math, and oh, here's an application, instead of doing that, we decided to focus on 2 applications per semester in depth and look at the math that naturally arose out of those applications. And so in a typical semester, somebody might spend the first half of the semester on the mathematics of politics, and there's some very interesting mathematics there, some rather deep mathematics there, and maybe a half a semester on cryptanalysis. Well, what was that all about? Well, it was a problem-solving experience because the students spent quite a bit of time in class breaking codes. But they also, we use that as a segue into some number theory, some group theory. These students had only ever seen high school algebra. Now they see a different algebra with different rules, okay? We ended with a study of public key cryptography with the RSA model. And so the students saw some math that was different from just pushing the symbols around. We cut our DFW rate from 58% to 26% almost overnight. And yet we were challenging the students to do, in some ways, more than what we'd been challenging them to do before. I don't know that the course was any harder or any easier, but it was different. And we were asking them to come in and do some problem solving without a lot of coaching from us, you know. So anyway, one day, I attended a mathematics department meeting. At present, I am serving the department as department chair. At the time, I was not. And I was just a faculty member in the department. And I went to a department meeting. And the dean came to this department meeting. And deans never came to our department meetings. What does this portend? Well, the dean announced, first of all, she announced that this was not her decision, but she announced that the administration had decided the following. Beginning the following fall, we would not have any developmental math courses at Austin Peay. Now, the developmental math courses were taught in a different department from the math department. We had a dedicated developmental studies department, and about half the incoming freshmen took developmental math courses. Okay. So she announced that beginning the following fall, there would be no more developmental math courses at Austin Peay. And furthermore, all of those students would either be placed into the liberal arts math class or statistics. And those students would be placed in special sections of those classes called E-sections for enhanced. And the enhancement was that the students attending the classes would be required to attend 2 hours a week, a mandatory 2-hour lab, to provide learning support for them. Okay? My jaw dropped. My jaw dropped and my mouth stayed open so long bugs started flying in. After about a week or two, or maybe closer to a month, when I had recovered sufficiently to speak, I began talking to the department chair and the various deans that were involved in the administration, and I said, now wait a minute. We're teaching 2 or 3 sections of this liberal arts math class a semester because we've got 2 or 3 teachers who are willing to teach it this way, and now all of a sudden we're going to triple our number of sections, and there are 1,000 details that have to be worked out, and all I could see in my tunnel vision was this is going to kill my liberal arts math class. So I got involved, and what happened essentially was that I kind of became the unofficial liaison between the math department and the division of the institution that was known as Enrollment Management and Academic Support. And the Enrollment Management and Academic Support arm of the university was taking care of the administrative necessities involved with getting these labs going that went along with courses. So what I'm about to show you, I think looks great. And I'll just have to tell you that I can't take any of the credit for it. It wasn't my idea, and I wasn't in favor of it, but I'm awfully glad we did it, because I think it's worked very well. So I'll talk to you about what we actually do and what has happened and what I think the next step is. And how much time do I have? I usually take off my watch, you know, like a preacher, and sort of look, and I wasn't clear what time I started. Basically, and you heard a lot about this morning indirectly, what we essentially do accelerates the journey. A mantra almost of a lot of folks who are knowledgeable about student success is that time is the enemy. These students, as Yuri mentioned this morning, a lot of them, they have lives, they have families, they don't need to spend a year and a half getting ready to take college level credit, and if they do, we're likely to lose them, and so we need to find ways to maintain our standards and uphold those standards, but accelerate their journey. So what we have done here is what NCAT labeled the linked workshop model. That's not what we were calling it to start with, but basically what happens is we have these two courses that existed already. Okay, one is a statistics course, the other is a liberal arts math class, and students, depending on their major, will be, if their compass scores or ACT scores fall below a certain threshold, they're placed into one of those courses. When the system was initially set up, and I do not recommend setting this up without input from the affected faculty, but that's what happened in this particular case. And when it was initially set up, we had these sections that were full of students, all who had the remedial placement, and then we'd have these other sections that were full of the, quote, for lack of a better term, quote, quote, regulars sections. And one thing that we have done and that I have been able to implement since I became department chair is we are mixing those now. In other words, in a typical statistics class, about half of the students have this developmental placement and the other half do not. And it's the professor may not even know, looking out in the group, I mean, he can find out if he wants to, but looking out at the group, he may not even be aware consciously of which students are which. He's just teaching a stats class. And then the half that have the developmental placement attend this mandatory 2 hours a week lab. So that's the way it works. The professor is responsible for the professor and the department are responsible for the course content and the curriculum, and the professor is responsible for the grade determination. We use primarily trained undergraduates to conduct this lab. And the lab, as I said, is mandatory. Freshmen don't do optional. I absolutely believe that. That lab is conducted by an undergraduate student. It has two purposes. One purpose is to provide tutorial support directly related to the class. So that undergraduate student who conducts that lab sits in on the class, okay, and meets once a week with the professor of the class to make sure that they know what's happening in that class. So when the students go to the lab leader spends part of that time in direct tutorial support for the class. The other thing that happens, and this is where the remediation comes in, early in the semester, each of the students in the lab is given a diagnostic pretest over some basic algebra competencies that we think are the underpinnings of what they will need to be successful in those courses. And then based on that diagnostic, they are assigned some things to work on using a computer instructional system, and they work on only that which the diagnostic pretest indicates they need to work on, and then they take post tests over that material. I'll run quickly through some data. and this is entirely consistent with what Uri said this morning about success rates in developmental courses. In the old model, lots of students first took an elementary algebra course. The success rate in that course was 53.1%. The people who survived that took an intermediate algebra course. The success rate in that course was 51.2%. And then they had to get through that before they were allowed to enroll in either the Math 1010 is the liberal arts math class, and the 1530 is the statistics class, okay? After they got through the developmental course, their chances of passing the liberal arts math course were 43.5%, and their chances of passing the stats course were 28.8%. Here is the data from last year, and I'm gonna have to confess that. I'm sorry. Rewind the tape for just. My confession doesn't come until the next slide. Okay, I don't need to make a confession about this slide. The 43% and the 28% were from the previous slide. Okay, last year. Students who were enrolled in this redesigned model, this means students who had scores, Compass or ACT scores that indicated they were at risk. 82% passed the liberal arts math class. Now these are pass rates, which do include the D's, okay, on this particular slide. And 71% passed the stats class, okay. When we look at the whole sequence, not just the class, the results are more surprising because there's a compounding effect, okay? Remember that 43% was the people who had, 43% of the people who had made it through DSP passed that next class, okay? But that doesn't account for the percentages that we lost along the way. If you take the 51% and multiply it by the 53% and multiply it by the 43%, you get 11%, and maybe that's being too loosey-goosey with the numbers because I know that 82% does include students that might not have had to go through that whole sequence, okay? But even if you think I've been too extreme in the way I've handled that multiplication, you've got to admit there is a compounding effect. We lose people with each successive course. Another thing that we looked at is, okay, we're getting these people, say, at higher rates through our statistics course. But surely that's just because we've lowered the standards in the statistics course, right? There's been a lot of pressure to get people through, and maybe without even realizing it, we've lowered the standards in the statistics course. I don't think so, okay? Because we looked at the next course. For a lot of the students who take the statistics course, that may be the last statistics or the last math that they take. But for students who were business majors, the business school required a statistics course called QM 3110, for which our Math 1530, our statistics course, was a prerequisite. So we looked at how they did in that class, okay? The students who came through the old developmental program and then passed statistics, okay? The 2005 cohort is what we looked at. The DFW rate in that business statistics course was 42.2%, okay? The students who came through the enhanced system did have, by about 10 percentage points, a lower DFW rate. That's still a fairly high DFW rate, but it's better than what we saw before. This is the slide that I have to make a confession about because what this slide does is it compares the pass rates in the liberal arts, math, and statistics of the students who have that enhanced placement and attend the lab. Those are the students with the scores that identified them as at risk, with the overall population. And I was a little selective in choosing last year. last year was the first year in which the E-section student pass rate actually exceeded the overall student pass rate in the liberal arts math class. That was the first time that had happened, and so I'll have to confess I chose that particular year, but it's been that rate has been steadily increasing. It's not, the pass rate in statistics for the E-section students is not as high as the overall pass rate, but it's higher than what we used to see with the old program. We do, and I'll just mention this. I won't take but a second because I'm not very knowledgeable about it, but we have similar programs in English and reading. Students who would formerly have been placed in developmental English now take a regular section of freshman English and they go to a lab. And we've seen some good results with that. Students who formerly had low scores in reading now take a regular section of history and they go to a reading lab where they and the reason they chose history, they tell me, is because it's a reading intensive course. And so they've seen some good results with that. Our fall-to-fall retention rates have been steadily rising. This is not the only reason. Our university has done many things to try to improve retention. So this is just one piece of the package, but we think that this in addition to some of the other things that the university has done, has improved retention rates. Challenges. One thing that made this so very hard are personnel issues. When they announced that the developmental studies program was going away overnight, our friends and colleagues who taught in that program, what happens to them? And they're not just, it's not just sort of it's a personal thing. I mean, we know these people, okay? They're not just numbers on a piece of paper, you know, we know these people. And so there are those kinds of things to discuss, you know, and those folks are still at Austin P and they're serving the institution in various and sundry ways. Some of them are teaching some classes in our mathematics department, and some of them are serving as professional advisors, and one of them is in a Title III grant office, and so but that's a very unsettling thing, and you know, it's kind of the elephant in the room sometimes when you discuss some of these things. You gotta have a Martin Golson, all right? Martin Golson is a graduate of Austin P's undergraduate math program. He went back to school after a career in the Army, which terminated, and he retired as a first sergeant. He brings his math knowledge and his first sergeant abilities to play daily. He is an instructional support specialist, and he reports to the Dean of Enrollment Management and Academic Support. He recruits the lab leaders. He and I together train the lab leaders. He pays the lab leaders. He supervises them. He is the source of most of the data that appeared on this slideshow. He's administratively, one thing you've got to be sure you have is the administrative support to pull off whatever program you implement. There's a certain amount of training. In our case, there's faculty development, and then there's also the training of the lab leaders. There are some misconceptions that you have to overcome. For example, I remember somebody telling me, remember my involvement started because I was trying to save my liberal arts math class, okay? And we did a lot of cooperative learning group activities rather than a lecture format. And I had somebody whom I respect very much look at me in the eye and say, Nell, developmental studies students can't do group work. What are you going to do in Math 1010? What do you mean developmental studies students can't do group work? Now, I did those E sections of 1010 and I volunteered to teach them. I did them just like I did my regular sections. And developmental studies students, whoever they are, can do group work just fine, you know. But there were all these very intensely held notions about those things. It defies conventional wisdom that you're going to take stuff that people ought to know in order to do a class and teach it to them while they're doing the class. But I think it goes back to if they see a connection between what they're doing, then it means more to them. And I know I have talked too long. So I'll just mention that our next big challenge, I think, is working very hard on our STEM pathway, because we've got the statistics pathway and we've got the liberal arts pathway. While it is true that students coming through the statistics pathway have higher success rates in college algebra than students going through the old developmental program did, I think we can do better. Their failure rates are still fairly high, and so I hope to take some of the things that I learned today from you guys and take what we're doing to the next level in regard to our STEM pathway. I talked too long. I'm sorry. Thank you.